Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 210 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 7 of Snake Magic. And here we go. As they hit the highest part of the pass, the cold got intense. Neidre had finished her body sock and had just enough wool left to make a simple hat, which she finished as quickly as possible, thanking Martha the entire time. Garrick stopped riding on his horse, instead having it led behind his carriage. He rode inside, alone. Neidre realized that many members of the party simply had no cold weather gear at all. They were starting to get cold, even taking the best precautions they could. And Garrick was the worst. He had no proper jacket at all. She doubted he had any blankets inside the carriage. When she saw him, he was wearing several thin layers of clothing in an attempt to stay warm. A day after that, on a particularly windy and thus brutally cold night, Garrick came to the cook wagon. "I need to come here to be warm," he said, shivering. "But this wagon is partly open. Your carriage is closed to the wind." "I don't care. It's horrible in there." "All right. I'm baking some bread for the morning. The stove is nice and warm. Curl up close to it." He did so. She would have to take out the bread in a while, but until then, she lay out alongside him. She didn't enjoy the sensation. She was already wearing her woolen garments. "So cold," Garrick said. He was bent around the end of the stove, facing it on his side. "Is there no magic for warmth?" Neidre wondered aloud. "Not that I've been taught," Garrick said. He was still shivering. "Most of my magic is meant for battles." "Battles?" Neidre asked. "Yes. For attacking foes, especially large numbers of foes." "Well," Neidre said, "I suppose if your quest puts you up against a large number of foes, you'll be prepared." "Yes," Garrick said, "and I think that may well be the case." That is not good, Neidre thought. What if Garrick is caught unprepared? What if he needs magic that isn't combat-related? Her thoughts were interrupted by Garrick. "I'm feeling warmer already, front and back," he added. This was slightly strange, since Neidre didn't figure her tail, or a stray bit of her tail sock, on providing all that much warmth to him. But at least he seems happy, she thought. "Thank the gods," he added. "Thank your gods," Neidre thought. She'd been made to go to services all her life on the estate, but despite this rigorous indoctrination, it had never really taken with her. She learned, with several whippings, not to discuss her views on religion, so this thought was not voiced. But she knew of no gods that were real, just the false ones that were promulgated by Master Caedmon. Perhaps she would learn about the real gods someday, or perhaps there were no gods at all. Garrick fell asleep, and Neidre watched him a while. She could not tell what she was feeling. Part of her despised him, this magician's apprentice, this young man who so proudly takes all that he is given, enjoys the fruits of the labors of so many. Part of her was angry at him, that his whims had to be carried out both by her and by the other demi-humans. And part of her was not. There he was, asleep, but she felt no urge to try to harm him. He was not the villain, not really. Was Master Caedmon the villain? She couldn't tell. She knew only that she was not happy and had no way of fixing it. She too was warm, she noticed. Perhaps it was the stove. She took out the bread that was baking and put it aside for the morning. She would toast it and serve it as a good portion of the morning meal. She managed to do so without waking Garrick up. She smiled at the loaves as she put them on the small shelves to cool. She could not put any more fuel on the fire, so the stove would cool over the course of the night. She hoped it would not be too cold by morning. It was not, and she slept well, stretched out with her tail, but resting her upper body on some grain sacks as she had before with Wilfred. Her hat, her scarf, and her body sock she thanked before drifting to sleep. The next morning, Garrick woke up and left the cook wagon without talking to her. She served the bread with some leftover stew and set to work on that night's meal. There were no towns or trading posts on the pass, so the kinds of ingredients she had to work with had dwindled. However, since she had made mainly the same stew the last 2 days, she used a good sprig of rosemary, one of the last real herbs or spices she had, That plus some salt was the only seasoning to add, though she still had onions, and of course the meat and potatoes had some flavor of their own. It had been a point of pride that the grumbling over the limited menu had been extremely minor. Part of her wondered if they thought she would spit in the stew. She knew that they all suspected that her bite was venomous. Of course it wasn't, but the rumor had spread anyway. She did not encourage the rumor, but she knew that if she became too vociferous in her own defense, it would be used against her as proof that she was in fact venomous. She had hoped that being chosen as the cook for this expedition might help quell those ideas. The day was clear, and though the cook wagon was covered, she enjoyed seeing the sunlight out the back opening as it creaked along. Wilfred and Eugene were on their horses, keeping an eye out for trouble. Garrick apparently found it warm enough to ride, because he joined them on his horse for a while. They were now making their way down from the upper reaches of the pass. It was slowly going to get warmer, though the nights, she knew, would be cold for some time. She thought she saw movement in the trees behind them, but couldn't tell what it was. Part of her considered trying to tell Wilfred or someone, but then she thought better of it. If it was nothing, she might get beaten for giving them a fright over nothing. Still, she at least tried to keep an eye out herself for any strange moments after that. The stew went over well that evening. Neidre noticed that Garrick on 2 occasions looked towards the cook wagon. She had been in it at the time, but didn't think he was looking towards her specifically. When she saw Wilfred and Eugene and a couple of others talking and looking over at Garrick, she thought she knew what was going on. The men were thinking Garrick weak for huddling up for warmth in front of her cook stove. She suspected that was the reason he went into his carriage and slept in there that night, probably achingly cold. That evening, while getting back into her body sock for the night, she noticed another strange scale. This one was bright blue and was near the side of her tail, only a little way down. She thought, not for the first time, that her scale's changing color could be a symptom of some disease, but she hoped not. She went to sleep. She didn't know what was going on. She was fully asleep when Ogden, the driver of the cook wagon, climbed up into the seat. He whispered over his shoulder, practically the first words he had ever said to her, "We're leaving." They were still the last wagon. It was still deep night. Neidre had a moment or two to wake up, hearing the other wagons and carriages leave. The horsed guards were clearly already mounted and apparently making a big show of their wakefulness and preparation. Neidre suspected they were under attack, but wasn't Garrick going to use his magic if that was the case? But no magic appeared, as far as she could tell, from the carriages up near the front of the wagon train. Meanwhile, she heard some strange noises from the trees, and she was in the rear wagon. And that's the episode for this week. Obviously, we've sort of reached one of the ends of the little middle parts, and we're at another sort of chunk of the story. So that's obviously going to start in earnest next week. So I look forward to writing that. I hope you enjoy listening, and we'll see you then. Thank you very much for listening. Words and music, copyright 2021, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.